Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7. My name is Saoirse Healey. We've no guest with us tonight, so it's just me running through the top stories of the day. As always, we'll start with our Ukraine update. It's day 624 of the war. In its latest daily intelligence update, the UK Ministry of Defence said Russia's military is being overextended by the war in Ukraine. The MOD said that it's likely that Russia will need to reallocate surface-to-air missiles systems from distant parts of its territory to maintain coverage over Ukraine showed the conflict is straining its military. EU leaders are expected to decide next month whether to accept the European Commission's recommendation to invite Kyiv to begin membership talks with the bloc. However, as Hungary said, the EU should not start membership talks with Ukraine, but instead should offer a form of privileged partnership for Ukraine. The Ukrainian Minister for European Integration, Olga Stefanishnya, said the Ukraine will be able to overcome Hungary's political opposition to progress its EU membership. She said, "We understand that there is such a statement, but we also understand that there is a dialogue with Budapest." The Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said Russia does not believe the EU's promises to admit Ukraine are real. "Most likely we are talking about a carrot that is tied in front of the cart," Peskov said in comments to Kremlin reporter Pavel Zarubin. Ukraine's parliament voted to approve its 2024 state budget. More than half of all Ukrainian spending is planned for defense sector to fund its war efforts against Russia. Ilya Vityuk, the head of Ukraine's security service, the SBU, cybersecurity department, has confirmed that Russian hackers were behind a cyber attack that disrupted part of Ukraine's power grid in late 2022. The report said that the attack was likely to have been carried out to maximize the impact of Russian missile strikes. Moving over to the Israel and Gaza conflict, the Gazan Health Ministry has said the number of people killed in Gaza by Israeli military actions since the start of the war on the 7th of October has risen to 10,569. It says 4,324 of these were children, and that a further 26,457 Palestinians have been injured. Thousands of Palestinian civilians attempted to make the perilous journey to the south of Gaza under white flags and carrying a few possessions, while Israeli tanks looked on as the war continued nearby. An IDF spokesperson has said that Hamas has lost control of northern Gaza as thousands of Palestinian civilians fled south. Quote, "We saw 50,000 Gazans move from northern Gaza Strip to the south. They are moving because they understand that Hamas has lost control in the north," Daniel Hagari said in a briefing on Wednesday evening. The US launched an airstrike by two US F-15 fighter jets on a facility in eastern Syria linked to an Iranian-backed militia in retaliation for what has been a growing number of attacks on bases housing US troops in the region for the past several weeks. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has again rejected the prospect of a ceasefire in Gaza amid reports of negotiations for a temporary truce with Hamas in exchange for 10 to 15 hostages. The AFP reported that talks were ongoing for the release of a dozen hostages, including 6 Americans, in return for a 3-day ceasefire in Gaza. IDF officials have claimed that the Israeli airstrikes in Gaza have killed dozens of Hamas commanders as troops advance deeper into battered territory. With some fighting in the heart of Gaza, however, there were doubts over the importance of the dead commanders within Hamas, and analysts said there was no obvious signs that the organization has been significantly weakened. Israel has claimed to have destroyed 130 Hamas tunnels in the Gaza Strip since it began its ground operation. The World Health Organization, the WHO, has said that WHO UNRWA medical supply convoy reached Al-Shifa Hospital in Gaza City on Wednesday. The UNRWA said it was only the second delivery of life-saving supplies to the hospital since the siege of Gaza began. Meanwhile, the Palestinian Red Crescent Society has said that all roads heading to Al-Quds hospital were closed on Wednesday and that medical teams are unable to leave the hospital to reach injured persons. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has said there is something clearly wrong with Israel's military operations because of the number of civilians killed in the Gaza Strip. The UN's human rights chief, Volker Turk, has said both Israel and Hamas have committed war crimes. Turk described the border crossing into Gaza as an unjustly outrageous thin lifeline and the gates of living in a nightmare, where Palestinian civilians are suffocating. The UN humanitarian chief, Martin Griffiths, has described the situation in occupied West Bank as increasingly dire. 158 Palestinians have been killed in the territory since the 7th of October, including 45 children. The Rafah border crossing between Gaza and Egypt was closed on Wednesday, and no wounded Palestinians or dual nationals were able to be evacuated from Gaza. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken also said that Israel must not reoccupy Gaza, but added that Israel might control the territory for a transitionary period. In a joint statement, foreign ministers from the G7 have called for a humanitarian pause to allow essential supplies to be delivered to desperate civilians in Gaza. Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has called for a significant humanitarian pause to allow for the release of all hostages and the delivery of aid to Palestinian territory. Moving back to the UK, Suella Braverman is under fire from an incendiary article in which she accused the Met Police of bias. Her future as Home Secretary seems to be in doubt after Downing Street has said that the article had not been cleared. A spokesperson for the Prime Minister said that the matter was being investigated and that the piece in the Times had not been agreed in what would appear to be a breach of ministerial code. The ministerial code states that the policy content and timing of all major press releases, interviews and appearances should be cleared by Number 10 to ensure the effective coordination of cabinet business. It's understood that the article was sent to Downing Street, but that major changes that had been made were not sought. Asked whether Rishi Sunak agreed that the police were guilty of double standards, the spokesperson said, "The Prime Minister continues to believe that the police will operate without fear or favour." In an article in the Times published on Wednesday evening, the Home Secretary said that unnamed police chiefs appeared to care more about avoiding flak than ensuring public safety. Quote, "Unfortunately, there is a perception that senior police officers play favourites when it comes to protesters," she wrote. Braverman has been accused of encouraging extremists and undermining thousands of serving police officers after claiming far-right protesters were treated more harshly than pro-Palestinian supporters. Nikki Aiken, the Tory deputy chief and MP for the central London constituency that includes the Senate tape, said Suella Braverman's comments were dangerous. Neil Basu, who was formerly the UK's most senior counter-terrorism officer, who retired as an assistant commissioner in the Metropolitan Police last year, said Braverman had given licence to the far right and should be sacked. Braverman's article has also caused widespread anger and confusion in Northern Ireland after she wrote that the marches were not merely a cry for help for Gaza, but an assertion of primacy by certain groups, particularly Islamists, of the kind we are more used to seeing in Northern Ireland. Jamie Bryson, a prominent loyalist commentator and politician, wrote on Twitter, "Braverman should have been clearer as to what she meant and the comparisons she was making." The Social Democratic and Labour Party leader Colm Eastwood called for the removal of Braverman from her position as he called the comments aggressive and ignorant. "It's honestly like reading a pound shop Enoch Powell piece," he said. The SNP's Chris Stevens told the House of Commons that a former assistant commissioner said the Home Secretary was on the verge of behaving unconstitutionally, adding, "Does this not mean and represent that the Home Secretary is unfit for office and should be sacked today?" At Holyrood, the SNP MSP Kevin Stewart said, "Each day Suella Braverman stays in her post as Home Secretary poses a real and immediate threat to thousands of people living in Scotland. The Prime Minister should waste no time in urgently removing herself from office. if his broken government is to hold any degree of credibility. Moving up to Scotland, the SNP has tabled a motion in the House of Commons calling for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, with the intention of pushing it to a vote next week. The amendment to the King's Speech would be the first opportunity for MPs to vote on a ceasefire, which is supported by SNP MPs and international figures such as the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. Commenting, SNP Westminster leader Stephen Flynn said, "The SNP is clear. There must be an immediate ceasefire to protect the lives of innocent civilians and to ensure vital supplies of food, fuel, medicine, and water can reach the civilian population." There is mounting pressure on the UK government and all parties in the UK Parliament to join international calls for a ceasefire. Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer cannot just sit on their hands while innocent men, women, and children are being killed through collective punishment. We must all unequivocally condemn the horrific killings by Hamas, demand the release of all hostages, and call for an end of the siege of Gaza and the collective punishment of civilians. The UK government and MPs of all parties have a moral imperative to join an international community in urgently pressing all parties to agree to an immediate ceasefire and to seek a resolution that upholds international law and protects the lives of innocent civilians. Shell is suing Greenpeace for $2.1 million in damages in one of the biggest ever legal threats against the group after its campaigners occupied a moving oil platform earlier this year. The lawsuit calls for an indefinite block on all protests at Shell infrastructure at sea or in port anywhere in the world, or the company will make claims that could reach $8.6 million if contracting companies also pursue damages. The oil company has mounted one of the biggest legal threats against Greenpeace in the environmental group's 50-year history after its campaigners occupied a floating oil platform in January to protest against damage to climate caused by Shell. 4 Greenpeace protesters boarded the platform just north of the Canary Islands, whilst it was being transported to the Shetland Islands, with signs demanding that fossil fuel companies, quote, stop drilling and start paying. Greenpeace has accused Shell of using aggressive legal tactics in an attempt to silence growing dissent over Chief Executive Wael Sawan's moves to double down on fossil fuel investment. Yeb Sanyo, the executive director of Greenpeace Southeast Asia and one of the protesters who boarded Shell's platform, said, "Shell is trying to silence my legitimate demands that it must stop its senseless and greedy pursuit of fossil fuels and take accountability for the destruction it is wreaking on the world." Sanyo added, "I will stand up in court and fight this, and if Shell refuses to stop drilling, I refuse to stop fighting for climate justice." Shell has been ordered by a Dutch court to cut emissions from its oil and gas by 45% by 2030 in an unprecedented ruling after Friends of the Earth took the company to court alongside more than 17,000 co-plaintiffs. The National Grid has announced plans to increase its investment to £42 billion by 2026 in an attempt to tackle the backlog of clean energy projects waiting to connect to UK Power's network. The National Grid is a privatised monopoly responsible for running most of the UK's power grid. It set out a new plan to invest a total of £42 billion in the UK and US in its 5-year spending framework running up until 2025 to 26 financial year. £2 billion more than it had planned in May. However, the company's chief executive, John Pettigrew, warned that fundamental reform of the UK's electricity network planning was still required to help tackle the growing logjam of clean energy projects waiting for grid connections. The UK government had been planning to run the grid entirely on clean electricity by 2035, but many renewable energy projects have been told that they face a 10 to 15-year wait for a connection before they can begin providing the network with clean power. In the King's Speech debate on energy, the SNP accused both Conservative and Labour of failing Scotland as they demanded devolution of energy powers. The SNP said that if Labour was serious about bringing down energy bills, for households in Scotland, they would support the devolution of energy powers to Holyrood and back calls for £400 energy rebate. Shadow Energy Secretary Ed Miliband said he would lay out how Labour's plans to bring down energy bills once and for all in today's debate in the House of Commons, but the plan didn't include devolving energy powers to Scotland. Commenting, SNP Energy and Net Zero spokesperson Dave Dugan, MP, said, "If the Labour Party are serious about Scotland and bringing energy bills down, then they will back SNP calls to devolve energy powers for the UK Tory government to bring back the £400 energy rebate. If they continue to remain silent on this, they are proving that, like the Tories, they can't be trusted to stand up for Scotland. Scotland is an energy-rich, yet households across the country are fuel poor. It is right that the natural energy resources of the Scottish people are used to help the Scottish people. With the Tories and Labour wedded to Brexit, austerity and economic decline, it's clear independence is the only way for Scotland to build a wealthier and fairer future." A Marine Accident Investigation Branch, MAIB, report has found that attempts to save 27 people who drowned in the deadliest channel disaster for more than 40 years were compromised by confusion, lack of resources, and poor communication between the UK and France. The 112-page MAIB report states that its role is not to apportion blame, but to identify the various problems that hindered the rescue operation. These included poor visibility, a lack of dedicated aircraft conducting aerial surveillance, and a shortage of staff in the control room at Dover, processing SOS calls from small boats in distress. The report said that the failed operation to reach the stricken dinghy on the 24th of November 2021 identified the wrong boat. A Border Force cutter rescued 98 people in 3 other boats that night, but not those on the dinghy carrying the 27 who died. The large number of boats crossing that night added to the confusion, with HM Coast Guard recording 99 incidents on the 24th of November 2021 and 757 people making the crossing. The report, published almost 2 years after the mass drowning, is critical of the people smuggling for sending the dinghy across the channel in such a vessel, describing it as wholly unsuitable and ill-equipped. It also said that some of the people on board the boats had made emergency calls that rescuers found did not reflect the actual situation when they reached them. Transport Secretary Mark Harper announced an inquiry into the mass drowning today, saying that it would be independent and non-statutory and designed to allow a full investigation into the circumstances of the deaths in the absence of a normal coroner's inquest. The 33 people on board the boat that sank on the 24th of November included 13 women and 8 children. One of the women was pregnant. The exact time and location of the partial sinking is unknown, and 2 people survived and 4 remain missing. Victims' bodies were recovered later that day in French waters. The International Organization for Migration said that it was the deadliest incident in the Channel since it started collecting data in 2014. The report recommends that the Maritime and Coast Guard Agency and Border Force develop procedures to ensure effective surveillance of the Dover Strait remains possible when aircraft are unavailable. It also recommends that the MCA work with the French authorities to agree ways of improving the transfer of information between the British and French Coast Guard agencies during small boat crossings. Andrew Mole, the Chief Inspector of the Marine Accidents of the MAIB, said this was a tragic loss in which many lives were lost. Our investigation has closely examined the events on the night to understand as best we can what went so wrong and what lessons can be learned to ensure that a dreadful night like this is not repeated. Moving to Ireland, a man has been found guilty of the murder of Aisling Murphy, a popular 23-year-old local teacher and musician, as she was attacked as she was jogging along a canal near Tullamore, Central Ireland, in January 2022, in a case that shocked the country. Joseph Puska is facing a mandatory life sentence after the jury returned a unanimous guilty verdict at Dublin's Central Criminal Court today. The prosecution described the evidence against Puska as overwhelming. He denied the murder when the trial began last month. The court heard that Miss Murphy was stabbed 11 times in her neck, which caused acute blood loss and her heart to stop. Puska will be sentenced on the 17th of November. Over to America, Hillary Clinton, speaking on ABC's daytime talk show The View, has compared Donald Trump to Adolf Hitler as she offered the blunt warning that Trump getting back into the White House would be the end of our country as we know it, and I don't say that lightly. The former First Lady, Senator, and Secretary of State said, "When I was Secretary of State, I used to talk about one and done. What I mean by this is that people would get legitimately elected and then they would try to do away with elections, do away with opposition, and do away with free press." Ms. Clinton added, "Hitler was duly elected. All of a sudden, somebody with those tendencies, dictatorial, authoritarian, would be like, okay, we're going to shut this down and we're going to throw these people in jail." And they didn't usually telegraph that. Trump is telling us what he intends to do. Hillary Clinton's comments follow a Washington Post report detailing how Trump is discussing how to use the Justice Department to investigate political rivals and former allies who have been critical of him should he return to the White House. He is also discussing invoking the Insurrection Act on his first day in office, which would allow him to use the U.S. military domestically to quell protests and dissent, something he was talked out of by military leaders during his one-term presidency. The New York Times has reported that Trump's team is preparing to staff a potential administration with radical right-wing lawyers who are less likely to block attempts to push the bounds of the presidential power. Hillary Clinton warned, "Trump is telling us what he intends to do. Take him at his word." Back to Scotland, and the Scottish Government has agreed in principle to fund the further development of the business case to investigate replacing the internal ferry fleet in Orkney. The agreement was reached during today's meeting of the Orkney Internal Ferry Replacement Task Force, which took place in Edinburgh and was chaired by the Deputy First Minister. The task force members also agreed to continue with the group and a potential approach to the UK government in the future. Deputy First Minister Shona Robertson said, "I would like to thank Orkney Islands Council for its constructive engagement through the task force process. We have agreed in principle to fund the further development of the business case as part of the budgetary process and will confirm that funding is in due course." The Scottish Government remains committed to the Orkney Ferry Replacement Task Force, and all members agreed to explore further engagement with the UK Government. Leader of Orkney Islands Council, James Stocken, said, "We are delighted with the progress that we have made with the Ferries Task Force meeting. The commitment in principle from the Scottish Government to funding the business case for our replacement ferries in this year's budget settlement, together with the absolute commitment to working together as we move forward to fully replace the ferry fleet, are both welcome." Scotland has become the first nation in the UK to adopt a feminist approach to international relations, with the publication of a new paper today by Europe and International Development Minister Christina McKelvey. Taking a feminist approach to international relations, FAIR, FAIR, sets out the Scottish Government's commitment to address inequalities like poverty and access to education, with a focus on understanding and addressing the root causes of those issues and shared global challenges such as conflict, climate change, and environmental damage. As a part of this, the policy sets out that the Scottish Government will continue to strive to give those most affected by these challenges a platform to speak for themselves and to influence and make decisions. The paper commits to speak out for meaningful change, to ensure Scottish Government funding is allocated in line with feminist principles, and to support women's organisations, feminist networks, and other grassroots movements to influence decision-making and participation in all levels of government. Ms. McKelvey said, "The global challenges we all face today, climate change, pandemics, conflict, are a reminder that what happens in the global north impacts the predominantly less developed countries of the global south and vice versa. We know these challenges affect women, girls, and marginalised groups more than they do others. This can be seen in poverty, gender-based violence, and barriers to accessing education. That's why Scotland is taking a leadership role in tackling these global and widespread inequalities in line with our commitment to do good, global citizenship to push for a fairer and more equal world. In this paper, we are committing to an international approach that ensures our efforts to address these issues abroad are in keeping with our efforts to address them here at home, whether that is through Scotland's efforts in international development, trade, climate justice, or peace and security. Our final story of the night, a new multi-million-pound initiative that will push the forefront of generative AI to benefit society and stimulate economic growth, has been launched at the University of Edinburgh. The Generative AI Laboratory, GALE, will unite the university's world-leading research and innovation in AI to develop safer solutions and systems for industry and government and bring substantial benefits to those who use them. The major initiative aims to develop techniques for generative AI in key areas such as robotics, drug discovery, medical diagnoses, semiconductor development, and tackling climate change. Experts will also work in partnership with the university's Centre for Technomoral Futures and take a fresh look at the ethical, legal, and regulatory frameworks necessary to ensure the safe and responsible use of AI. Generative AI is a type of machine learning that can be used to generate various types of content, including text, images, audio, video, and computer code. Progress with this type of AI has been swift in recent months, and generative AI has already transformed business operations, increasing productivity and enhancing areas of academic study. The university has a well-established, high-performing computing infrastructure with an international reach, which is vital for building AI systems. It currently hosts the UK's national supercomputer Archer 2 and is soon to be one of only a handful of institutes in the world to have a next-generation supercomputer, the exascale. Edinburgh has deep-rooted partnerships with public and private sector institutions that stand to benefit from the innovative use of generative AI that GALE will create. The interdisciplinary initiative builds on 60 years of research into AI and computer science at the university. Since the first research groups were established in 1963, Edinburgh has been a world leader in developing some of the systems that underpin generative AI, including machine learning and natural language processing. Professor Ian Gordon, the Vice Principal and Head of the College of Science and Engineering at Edinburgh University, said Edinburgh is uniquely placed to provide world-class leadership and expertise on generative AI. Once operational, this exciting initiative will create a new pipeline of talent with the skills to both benefit from and shape the economic societal benefits of this transformational technology. Professor Helen Heisty, the head of the School of Informatics at Edinburgh University, said GALE builds on world-class research at the School of Informatics in AI and Machine Learning, which has been applied to a variety of fields such as healthcare, fintech, and sustainability. So that's it for this evening. Before I go, I just want to remind you, here at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of you, our viewers. So to everyone who's already signed up to make regular monthly payments, thank you so much. Our programmes will, of course, always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. Our need to reach our £30,000 target to pay our bills is still very pressing. Due to your generosity, we have already raised £20,600. However, the need to raise the remaining £9,400 is still really urgent. Thank you for watching and good night.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Lewis McGlynn.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Saoirse Healey.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Donald C. Stewart. Broadcasting Scotland is Scotland's independent broadcaster, providing factual news, reporting on the issues important to to the people of Scotland.
We are committed to public service broadcasting, and with your support, we will produce even more programmes.
Provide opportunities for young people interested in media production and broadcasting, and challenge preconceptions of what Scottish media looks like, amplifying Scotland's voice and reflecting its communities.
We can already deliver high-quality live news, and we will create the highest quality programmes for you to enjoy. But we can only do that with your support.
So please subscribe to and share our channel or donate to Broadcasting Scotland via the link in the description. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.